are so willing when asked to help to take those things on. So that's been really a fun opportunity, and it's nice weather a lot of the time in New Mexico, so I have a big stack of quilts that I found for cheap that people can take outside and sit on the ground. And there's just a nice feeling of, oh, I have this time as a professional to really delve in and then to talk with my colleagues. And then we always do some shared takeaways that we document, and then I send those out to people afterward. So that's really the third model. So I have tried to create some containers for the 2.5 hours that can be repeated, so even though the topic changes every month, I don't have to figure everything out from scratch every month, and it allows me to focus on really thinking about, all right, where's the community connection? Is this topic gonna feel too maybe esoteric for someone who's just struggling with like the PARC tests this week, and how am I reaching people who are in a very different situation than my own? Before I go on to the next thing, are there questions about those events? Yes?
For the colloquy, do you send the readings out ahead of time, or do they just do them when they get there?
They do them when they get there, so it's part of the afternoon. And I've thought about that. I don't know that it would work because we all have these great intentions to read ahead of time in it, right? But everyone gets a copy of all of the readings, and then you can pick which group you want to go to talk about it. So you wouldn't have time to read them all there. You'd get the whole thing. I give an introduction to the articles, and then you settle in and maybe have a half hour to read out of that 2.5 hours by the time we do a framing exercise and read, and then go to the group of your choice for probably a 45-minute discussion. Yeah, it's a great question. Any other questions at this point?
Like pre-registration before?
Yes. You don't have to pay, but you do have to register or RSVP, and I thank the gods of technology for Google, because it's made my life a lot easier. So people just sign up. And when we started out, it was like, hey, email me that you're coming, right? It was that, it was just chaotic, and there wasn't a system in place. Of getting a little bit better. So yes, people register, and then there will be people who don't show. And so we pretty much can count on having about 10 people who don't show up every time. So for this event we had last week, we had 65 people. I think 80 had registered, and I knew there would be 80. So yes.
I suspect you're going to talk about this, but I'll ask anyway. The decision-making process about what you're presenting, what the content is. I'm assuming these aren't just your decisions, that you have a group of board that you work with, advisors of some kind.
So I wish I had like a really sophisticated answer for that. I have an advisory council, and they're not a board because we're part of Ball Street School, of course, but they are a great advisory council. Their work with me tends to be more around fundraising, and then a couple people on our faculty who are on the advisory council that I call and say, I'm freaking out about my event this week. I don't really feel like I've got it down. Can I talk it through with you? But the topics I am generating them. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
It is what it is.
Right, it is what it is right now. And in my ideal world, there'd be like a staff of us, and we'd be figuring these things out together. And sometimes it's just what it does for me is it forces me to pay attention to what's coming up for people and really listen to that. And I'm doing a lot of work with our faculty, so sometimes it comes out of that work. For example, our last Reflect, Innovate Act of this year in May will be focused completely on diversity and equity issues, and there'll be a series of concurrent workshops led by people in the community. So that work is coming out of an in-house professional development day that I put together in January. And so those relationships with people, and they were so fantastic. Some of these people who led sessions, I want them to be in front of a larger audience. Now I'm really going to be pondering this question. So, yeah.
Don't you think then each time you meet, there's an underlying undercurrent that could generate the content for the next meeting.
Yes, and I do send
The
out.
ideas that you just don't address or the
Yeah.
unexpected.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I think that, yes, absolutely. It's not
It's an
like,
ongoing process.
and it's not like, these ideas aren't out in the world and I'm somehow magically coming up. They're out there, right? And people have suggested topics too. Like there's a big, a lot of people are saying, can we have another mindfulness session? Those kinds of things. I gather feedback rather obsessively, and so one of the questions is always, what would you like to see? You know, if you have a great idea for a topic. So thank you. But the decision about what it is, I guess I am sort of making on my own. I don't know if that's, now I'm gonna worry about that, right? All right, I'm watching the clock, so I'm gonna move on. This slide I'm gonna touch on really briefly because I mentioned it in the write-up for the workshop, and then I thought, why did I put that in there? It doesn't really fit, but I will mention it. So in addition to this monthly series, Reflect, Innovate, Act, the Sophia Center is doing some other public programs. This is one of them that we piloted last year called Wild Leadership, a retreat for education leaders. And we'll be doing that again in May 5th through 7th. So we piloted it last year as a Friday night, Saturday event. And this year it'll be Thursday evening, Friday, and Saturday. So a little bit longer. If you know Tom Herr, who writes do you know Tom?
Yeah, from New City.
Yeah, from New City. So Tom's coming to be part of that leadership group, and then Elsa Menendez, who's the education director at National Hispanic Cultural Center, so some people like that. And in our first year, we piloted it and said we had 25 spots, and they filled. And it was a lot of fun. It was really a wonderful experience for me. And I also learned about what I want to do differently, so I'm hopeful this year that that'll work. So, my year of drinking coffee. So how do these relationships come about? It was really, Reem's talk this morning was so moving to me, and I loved that she focused on kind of the heart of things and the real, like the spirit of your work. And then I love, of course, that TED Talk by Rita Pearson, which I've seen before, which was so great to see it again. Like a lot of those talks, you hear something different every time. And I really loved what she talked about in terms of relationship. So in terms of how to build these connections with people working in public schools or in public organizations, when I really sat down to think about how has that happened, that relationship piece is what came up over and over again. And so it started out when I was first designing the Sophia Center. It started out as the year of drinking coffee, which really was, sorry, Reem, it should have been tea, I guess. It was a year of calling people up and saying, could we have a cup of coffee? I'd love to learn about what you're doing. And it didn't have to be coffee, but you get the idea. And so I wanted to share just a couple of practices that have really helped me in this work. And I'll start by, really before I get to this one, even saying, one thing that's been really important for me from the beginning is just to be honest about who I am, right? So I've worked in private schools my whole career. I've had a lot of access to education. I'm a white, middle-class woman. All of those identities, this is who I am. I can't say I know what it's like where you are and where you're working. And just to be upfront about that and to say, but what I'm passionate about is creating space where we can all come together and have conversation and learn from one another and my own growth included. So these are some practices that have helped me in terms of building these relationships and connections. To be genuinely curious about other people's vision and work. I don't think we can manufacture that. You're either curious about other people's education practice or you're sort of not, right? But what we can get better at are the tools about how we listen and how we ask people to tell us about their work and really being present to that. And so that's been an important part of building these relationships. Ask if you can visit. If you've always wanted to go visit this new charter school in town or the public elementary school in a neighborhood you drive through on your way to such and such, call and ask. I've never had anybody say no, ever. I've had people be really delighted that you want to come and see what they're doing, right? Show up with coffee, and you can take this literally or figuratively, but when I've been asking people for their time, I think just whatever gesture one can make to say, I really value this and I really appreciate it. So if it's texting on the way, I'm stopping for coffee, what's your favorite drink, I'll bring it to you, or if it's just some gesture of, the handwritten thank you note with all those things that are that we were taught growing up, good practices. Invite people to share their expertise. I've talked about this already, that someone out there in the community is doing something amazing. Invite them to share it in this space that you created and honor them through that. Give credit where credit is due. Early on, when I mentioned inviting these 2 charter schools to share at a Saturday retreat their professional development model, one school shared their video protocol, which we've now adopted and adapted in some ways, but I always credit them. It's on every piece of material I hand out. It says, this is what I learned from the amazing teachers at Amyville High School. And I let them know that, hey, we used your video protocol yesterday. It was so great, thank you again. And those things go a long way. And then lastly, for me, it's like change my practice based on what I learned. And we come here, right? We're gonna sit in on these sessions. How am I gonna change my practice based on a question someone asks me that's a really great question? What does that mean about how I go forward? So that willingness to change and to adjust, that we're not just out there mining other people's expertise, but without a willingness to change. So I mentioned in the description that I wanted to talk a little bit about why the aesthetic matters. And when I say aesthetic, I mean it not so much in terms of our preferred aesthetic, because you can never create an aesthetic that's going to appeal to everyone, right? But I mean it more in the kind of principles and mindset that underlie or that are part of looking at or living in a particular kind of work, if that makes sense. So what are those mindsets, those practices? So I think that, do the flowers matter? We have flowers at all of our events, and I had someone helping me with this in the early years, and she hated doing the flowers. In fact, she said it one time to someone who was at the event, and I thought, oh, that is so awful. But they do matter. It doesn't need to be flowers, though. Whatever your thing is that you can say, here's a way of honoring you, do that thing. Flowers are inexpensive. People come in and they're like, oh, this is nice, and they feel like this is important work. And I think this is about teaching well as an honorable practice, and we need to treat it as such. And many of us work in schools where we're able to do that, but in the larger culture, we know this isn't what happens. So I worked with middle school students for 20 years total. Not once in 20 years, when someone asked me what I did and I told them, did they ever say, oh, that's amazing, I would love to have done something like that, or I would love to do that. What I always heard was, ugh, middle school, wow, I can't imagine, or it's kind of like you're crazy a little bit. And I thought, who does that? We do that in our culture around teaching. There are lots of jobs I can't imagine having, and I would never say, wow, really? That's what you do? Wow, that's a little nuts. We do that around teaching, and I think in our work, in these public-private partnerships, what we can do is push against that. And push against it intentionally and say, no, this work is really important, and we're gonna set the stage for that. So doing that in some way that says the work matters, shift the common rituals. The common rituals around professional development are that, oh, we have an in-service, oh, it's gonna be a top-down training. Those are the common things. Here's your kind of poorly photocopied handout. I'm not saying anyone here does that, but I'm saying this is what teachers are telling me when they come to the Sophia Center, when they come to Reflect, Innovate, Act. And so shift that by doing something a little differently. And then lastly, I would say some kind of ceremony matters. I don't mean a graduation or a wedding, but I mean develop something in your practice. So whether you're running a program with students or you're running a program for adults, what are those things that are going to anchor it through some sort of ceremony? And ceremony and ritual are overlapping. For us, it's the closing reading, which we're going to do here in just a minute. And we did this at the first Reflect, Innovate, Act session, and it worked, and we've done it ever since. And so people know that's how we close our gatherings, and just those small things can go a long way. Exhilarations. I'm going to race through the exhilarations because we have about 7 minutes. Just the joy in the work. I feel really blessed to do the work, and I feel really fortunate to have developed these relationships with people across New Mexico that I didn't have 3 years ago. And many of those have developed into deep friendships. So just the sheer pleasure of the work is one of the exhilarations. The numbers, I didn't, we far surpassed our goals right from the beginning in terms of schools and organizations that would participate, and I'm excited about that. The diversity of schools and organizations that are represented at the events has been really moving, and the regulars. It would be concerning to me if no one came back, right? If you had a new group every month, and at the same time, you better hope that you have new people every month. So I feel grateful for the folks who've been deeply committed and supportive, and I know I can rely on them to help carry the afternoon, that it's not all on me. And the action piece. So in this follow-up feedback that I get, I'm always asking people, what have you done with this work? What have you done with this idea? And it's really moving to hear Andrea Fletcher, who teaches in the Metropolitan Detention Center at a charter school that's located in the detention center. When she wrote me back to say, I just did this labyrinth exercise with my students who are all in the detention center, and they loved it. They want to build a labyrinth. I mean, those kinds of things are the exhilarations, right? In funding so far, okay? And I haven't spent as much time on this as I should have. What I want to offer is, if you're starting a program, or if you're in a program where you're working with adults, I would say we have permission to jump in and try it even though funding may not be secure. That's what we did. We just said, let's go, and then we'll figure it out. I think if we're talking about something with kids, we can't do that. You've got to have, a different plan, because it's a different kind of commitment. We were able to jump in and just start with very little money, and we're still running it on a bit of a shoestring, which gets me to the challenges. If I could rewind this, when I presented it to our board, I made an assumption that they understood what my internal work would continue to be, and I so overemphasized the public piece that I think they thought the Sophia Center was only these public programs, and they forgot that I'm the director of professional development with our faculty, and I've had to kind of work at getting the story right, because when there's a squeeze and the economy's not good, and there's an idea that I'm only doing these public things, that doesn't work, right? So we're working on that. I don't know if the diversity of individuals equals that of the institution. So I'm really curious about who's not there, and how do you figure out who's not at the table and why they're not coming. And I think some of that has to do with who have I tapped to lead some of these sessions, and that I need to branch out in terms of that piece, because they're looking at who's leading, what the program is, and so trying to be very strategic right now about that. And that is a place where the advisory council is really helping me think about that. What does next year's programming look like? I know that teaching is a women-dominated profession, but I still think we don't have as many men coming as I'd like to. There's not a lot of infrastructure when I keep saying we at the Sophia Center. It's the many me's, right? The many Cheryls. I do have some administrative help with the public events, paid for through a grant, and then I have some fabulous volunteers. But that's going to have to change. It's not a sustainable situation for me. And then funding is, both an exhilaration because so far it's worked. But we're really right now in a place of looking at what's the 5-year, 10-year strategy for the Sophia Center. There's a wonderful New Mexico-based foundation, Kuhn Charitable Foundation, and we were fortunate enough to develop a relationship with them early on, and they've increased their funding each year. But we're still running, I would say the public portion of this, including a portion of my salary, we're still running for like $45,000 a year. So it's just not, it's not enough to be sustainable in that sense, and nor to grow it. So that's an issue. I'll just leave her up there because, it's Maxine Green and it's about possibility, and I'm watching the time. So as I send these around for our closing reading, are you okay if we go 2 minutes over? Can we do that? Okay. Questions? I've talked way too long. But as these are going around, what can I answer? Yeah.
I'm curious, do you ever run into a problem where you find the conversation going into a negative direction? And
Yeah.
what do you do to?
Yeah, I've got a few key people who are responsible for that. But I mean, I bring that. I see when they sign up, I think, okay, and I'm sometimes strategic about getting them to a group where I feel like they can be brought back in. But yeah, a bit. One thing that works against that is the diversity of people in the room. So I've been doing some contract work with Albuquerque Public Schools. When I'm in that setting and everyone's in the same boat, it goes south more quickly. In this setting, because you have more people saying, well, it's not like that for me, or it seems to stay on track a little bit better. But it's people need to talk, and sometimes they forget that, so do I.
With that though, are you talking about that they're kind of upset or fed up with education in general or their experience, or is it more like attacking the topic that you're?
No, the former,
Okay.
yeah.
So you don't get a lot of pushback on the specific, I guess they're choosing to be there.
They're choosing to be there, so it's you get maybe more pushback when I'm doing work around assessment with the faculty at my school, for example. 1 or 2 more questions? Yes.
So as a printmaker, I think a lot about disseminating knowledge, and I was wondering, do you have like a quarterly journal or website? How do you share?
I have a website,
kind of-
and if you look at it, you'll see the basic information and not a lot else. So we're in a rebuild right now, so I'm excited about that. I don't have a newsletter, but that's on those lists of things that I would love to have with some infrastructure. I feel like if I had an administrative assistant, I could write a newsletter. I do post a lot of things in our school newsletter, so some regular things there. And one more?
As for marketing, how do you market them? Is it just?
Early on, through those calling people up that I knew, relationship building, putting in the Albuquerque Public Schools newsletter, and word of mouth. Yeah. So I can't say it's because of fabulous social media because I don't have it right now. Do you want to do this, or should we call it a?
Yes.
Okay, so here's how it works. All right. So we close every session with this. I'll read it through. This is a really short one. I put 2 quotes together, but I'll just read them almost as if they're one. And then I invite you to say a word or phrase that speaks to you. It's okay for there to be silences. It's okay if you happen to speak at the same time as someone else. We just keep going, and when that seems to have died down, I'll reread it. And that will be the official close of our session. So I'm sorry I didn't leave enough time for more dialogue, but thank you for being here, and I hope I get to talk with some of you over lunch. To be truly visionary, we have to root our imagination in our concrete reality while simultaneously imagining possibilities beyond that reality. We cannot seek achievement for ourselves and forget about progress and prosperity for our community. Our ambitions must be broad enough to include the aspirations and needs of others for their sakes and for our own. Feel free to just jump in.
Legacy,
Beyond.
imagination,
Aspirations.
pushing
Reality.
boundaries.
visions.
Connectedness, encouraged.
To be truly visionary, we have to root our imagination in our concrete reality while simultaneously imagining possibilities beyond that reality. We cannot seek achievement for ourselves and forget about progress and prosperity for our community. Our ambitions must be broad enough to include the aspirations and needs of others for their sakes and for our own. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you. And I really would welcome more dialogue and exchange, so I hope somebody will seek me out.